Now, we've got enough time for substantive questions. You chaps can come over here and share the microphone. There's only 2 papers really to ask questions about, but go for it. Bill?
Two observations, not questions, but we've got
Fortunate
to know. There was a slide which David produced showing the passage of the Catalinas. That there were 2. There was a red curved path, and there was a yellow straight path across the West Australian coast on one of those slides. Okay, it's worth noting that a lot of times on charts you'll see, and that was a chart of some sort, or what, not really, but purported to be a chart. They're normally shown as a straight line. In fact, what they are, when you undertake them, is what's called a loxodrome, which is a curvilinear path. And that's because the Earth is the globe, and it's the shortest route between 2 points. So that's one thing that you may not have understood. The next thing is that there's a difference between Navy navigation and air navigation. And the principal difference is the Air Force gets off lightly because it only uses, or used to use 7 stars. And what happens, or would have happened if the navigators in the air, they get up in the bubble and they use an air sextant and shoot those object stars, mainly the sun, and mainly at noon if they had it for long flights, because that gives what's called a sun run move past. You're travelling in a straight line, it's actually a curve. You take the sun, you know the distance, the time travelled, gives you the airspeed, and you make these calculations. Well, at night, someone said, someone was quoted as saying, at night we only had the stars to go by. But you've got to bear in mind that when the Navy takes a star, or the sun, you have to have the horizon, and that has to be dark enough to see the stars, but light enough to see the horizon. But in the air, you're not taking the horizon. It's just the position of the stars, which amounts to dead reckoning, less precise. So it explains why a lot of these aircraft, and I found one in the Palm Islands in the southwestern Coral Sea, once it liberated, that it bumped into Mount Diamantina on one of the islands off the far north Queensland. I can't recall which one. I took an expedition there, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But a lot of them were bumping into things because they just weren't, their navigation wasn't very good, and this is particularly applied to the United States Army Air Corps.
And you've got a question?
Yep.
Go on.
That's it.
Oh, sorry. There's a comment. Thank you.
Comment.
Do you want to comment on the comment?
Thank you, Bill. So I was going to answer that. Actually, if you looked at that map, and there was a difference in the 2 flight paths on the way home, because it was a lot harder to fly to Ceylon from Perth with any degree of dead accuracy. On the way home, they just highballed it west, if you like, and went to, say, Geraldton, and then it was easier to navigate along the West Australian coast down to Perth. So the return leg would have been a lot more less fraught than the outward leg.
Because when you go to Ceylon, it's uphill. Graham.
Question, if I may, for Anthea and Alex. With the war artists, what proportion was done after the event, and how administratively did they do that? In that, you know, if it's during the war, you get paid, you get your rations and whatever. But if it's a post-war commission done at a sketch or a revisit, how administratively was that done?
So the artists were commissioned to basically go into the field, create sketches, and pretty much everything came back and was property of the memorial. And then where there were large commissions, so that Owen Stanley's painting, they were commissioned individually, and the artists were then back in their studio doing like a large history painting, as they're known. And so there's obviously sort of limitations on how many big paintings that we could have, but essentially everything in the field, you can kind of guess from the circumstances. Like if it's someone sitting for a portrait, you'll be there sitting in front of them. If it's an action scene, they've presumably, ideally they'd witnessed that. That's where a lot of the artists, particularly for the light darky, they were really comfortable because they could see it and they could draw it. And you know, but immediately afterwards, But then you can see from Norton's sketchbook that he's clearly sitting on the ship right at port, sketching what he's seeing in front of him, which I think is where the sketchbooks are just so engaging because they have that really diaristic quality. So yeah, depending on kind of the scale of the work, which is also just, as to get on my soapbox, where actually seeing the work is so useful because when you have it in front of you, you can kind of get a sense of how big it is, what kind of paper it's on, that tends to suggest how it was created, but where you're seeing reproductions, you sort of edit out a lot of that information. Thank you.
Can I follow up with a question about the same area? That I was struck when I read the book, because Dargy is the one with the Liberator and the attack on years, reading this in the book, and I was struck how, well, to be honest, how bad it is. The Liberator is not even in the right perspective. I mean, it's a terrible picture. And when you showed the Dargy figure paintings immediately after, which were so much better, was Dargy embarrassed? I mean, was he conscious that he wasn't really that kind of artist to do that kind of Liberator picture?
Yeah, you can see most artists know their limitations.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably unfair of me to put that, select that one for the book, but it was kind of interesting because it talks about the mechanics of what the artists, the limitations of what they could actually see were. And so you can see how he's tried that. So it's notable as the first painting he did. We've got really great records because the artists were corresponding with Trelaw and they were including numbered lists of the artworks. And so the numbers basically correspond to roughly the order in which they were created. And so we've certainly got it down to the fortnight as to which ones they were, when they were painted, because of when the letters were sent. And so that one is clearly the first one. And so you can see that Davey's like, okay, I've arrived in Burma, I'm talking to these guys, I'm based with the RAF in a new country. What am I doing? How am I doing it? So you can sort of see him finding his feet. And he's obviously, it's obviously incredibly interesting what the RAF have done. So he's trying to capture that, but it's just not entirely successful because when you actually think about the fact that most people don't see planes from above unless they're actually in another plane. He couldn't be there. So how do you then say, oh, this is a Liberator, which I've never seen before? What do you reckon it looks like from a three-quarter view from above when you've diagonally? Like, that's a complex visual thing. So you can kind of see him going, oh, that's not a great painting. Let me actually do what I can do well, which is the portraits and the scenes on the base. And what he does with all these letters is actually kind of capture the history. So he gives a plotted history of every one of them he does a portrait of, he tells a bit of information about the bases. He does quite a few sketches of the local civilians working on the bases, which again, when you think about the fact that you're in remote parts of India or Burma and you're building runways for aircraft that are larger than anything that's been ever seen before, particularly in that part of the world. And they've literally got mules with carts bringing materials in to build them. So he's capturing all of that kind of on the ground as well.
And Dargy or Trelaw didn't say, this isn't very good, Bill. Do you want to keep that one?
No, well, they sort of the letters were going back and forth, but the paintings got kept until there was a sort of ship going back. And then there'd be delays in the shipping. And so Dargy was sort of about to leave India to go up to Egypt and then go to Greece. He's writing back to Trelaw, I don't think these works are great. I think I might have. And he's basically saying I feel burnt out because of everything he's been through. He's also just spent 2 weeks, so I forgot to mention in the middle of January at 45, he spends 2 weeks in hospital with malaria that then plagues him for the rest of the war. And so you can tell he's just kind of aware that he's not doing his best work. And it's also reflected like the sizes of those works, they're all quite small. He also had the issue of not being able to get great materials, so the canvas, like he was getting canvas boards, but because of the humidity, they were buckling. And so he had basically everything against him. It's amazing he managed to achieve anything, and it really speaks to his dedication. He actually did as many works as he did. So I think, and so he was kind of saying to Trelaw, I don't think these works are great, but Trelaw couldn't really answer him for another 6 months until the artworks actually arrived. And then I think there was just a sense that because Trelaw, and I mean this in a kind of positive way that sounds really bad, was more of a bureaucrat than a curator. So because these works had all been sent by the artists, if the artist sent them, he kept them. He numbered them, put them in the collection. And so the only thing that really stopped an artwork from coming in was if the artists themselves chose to get rid of it, which a lot of them did. Or take it back. Sometimes they did demand to change things.
When Trelaw was giving commissions to the painters, did he say, okay, X number have to be men in the action, or I just want scenes of rickshaw or whatever, or was it left to the artist to make the decision? What was the purpose for an historical record, or was it for a battle record, or was it for just, oh well, that's where they are? What was the criteria?
So a bit of everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think you clearly recognise that everybody had their limitations. Some guys were much better at portraits, some guys were much better working in the ground. His overall instruction really was just to work continuously to get as more representations as you can, and to not stay in one place for just too long. Because he wanted to try and cover everything and cover everything right. And that was kind of
So there's instances, there's a famous kind of correspondence, famous in possibly niche way, with Nora Hyson, so one of the first female artists who deployed to New Guinea, where he writes and sort of accuses her of basically capturing the nurse's social life. And then she writes back a fairly pointed letter saying, describing the limitations on what she could actually see and the actual importance of what she was capturing. And so there is this sort of back and forth that they were getting feedback on whether what they were doing was what was wanted. But generally, I think Trelaw did, trust the artists that they would go and they would create records of what they saw, and he was appreciative of, I think, all of the complexities, that Norton spent vast amounts of time at sea where comparatively not a lot happened, which ultimately is kind of a good thing in some ways, not a battle, but yeah, that was what he wanted to capture. But it's difficult because you guess which shoe is going to be under fire, and if you have that ability to do a range of other decisions other than what artists is going to be on.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, just to add something to Graham's question, there's some excellent photos of artists doing their work in the field, and the more we've got some really quite sense collection. I think that really gives you a great perspective on what they were seeing and what they were doing out there.
Yeah, the photos are great, but they also really get a sense of just how staged those photographs are. But they do give a sense of just how difficult it is. And there's wonderful accounts of artists. There's one great ones from Vietnam where the artist was talking about how they basically had to bind their arms up because otherwise there'd be so much sweat on the paper. But they're these pristine drawings, and you just think, how did you do that?
Jan?
Oh, I spoke with Anthea before. I interviewed Bill Darby for the Memories of War, and if anybody wants to read about his technique, you could actually, if you could find a copy in the library, because there is one in the War Memorial, you can do it. Now, I know that he poo-pooed modern artists like Rick Amor, etc., who take photographs in the battlefield and then come home and paint the painting. He went everywhere with his little bottle of ink and his little paints and his pen. And he somehow got time during this service to do it. But when we were doing the oral history project, they actually decided they could no longer afford to fund it, the club. So I was interviewing him at the time, and he donated all the copies he had of his sketches from the Greek campaign to us, so we could auction them. We had an arts, and I also got some from Rick Baber and Robert Inkpen. Quite amazing. We raised enough to finish the project. However, they were all photographs of his sketches that were on a sheet of quite stiff cardboard with the identity. Now, he gave those to us, the 2nd 22nd Artillery, who is now in the Paran down the mess hall, the mess in the Paran. They bought, cost them $1,000, 4 of them put in $250 each. They got the bulk of the campaign ones, and other bits and pieces we sold. And in fact I've got one at home, which he did in Calcutta. But that's his copies from the War Memorial. Somewhere in the memorial, his originals must be there, I would think. It's just that's one of the things that I learned doing it. It was sort of quite amazing that, he had such a keen eye and was obviously so quick with materials that he could be very, very competent doing it. Thank you, Peter.
Peter?
Okay, just a couple of quick things. How close do a lot of the artists actually get to frontline action? A lot of them must have been done afterwards, but were many renowned for being in the front line and recording. And I'd also like to testify that Darby did get all our pictures. My father spent 6 weeks sharing the cabin with him on the way back from the Middle East and did what I think was a very nice oil painting of Czech didn't like it, so he gave it to my father. So he did.
Yeah, the question about the front line, it does vary, just depending on what theatre you're in. But certainly Dargie was, he would go on patrol in New Guinea, and he was talking about the fact that, he was seeing people injured and they were trying to get them out of ravines, and he was helping, bear stretchers basically. And so he was certainly of the mindset that, which is very common amongst all the artists, they never want to be in the way and actually impede the forces doing their jobs. But that means often they're the ones that are then marching, often with a full kit and all their artist equipment, through horrible conditions, and then trying to find a way of actually doing any kind of work when you're in a pouring rain or whatever. And so, yeah, certainly during First World War in particular, I think more of the artists got a lot closer to the front lines.
Just out of interest, have many artists been killed in action?
Fortunately,
You're aware of none?
none. So there's been a couple of injuries and one prisoner of war.
Yeah, Carl.
Question for David. So you kind of hinted at it with the certificate to review here. Who are the passengers that are making this long flight from Perth to Ceylon?
In 2 words, a mixed bag. And so I think Admiral Hussey was one of the passengers. The 1,000th passenger was a blind First World War serviceman who was in an organisation supporting invalid veterans, if you like. And then there was one incident, there had been a murder in Adelaide, and a Chinese seaman had absconded on a passenger, freighter, if you like, and his next port of call was Ceylon, so the detective was flown across there to sort of like bring this person home. So it ranged from brigadiers to Keith Murdoch, for example, the media baron. So VIPs, I guess is a better way of saying it, plus the olden side. And I guess space was obviously limited because the Catalina could only bring 3 passengers at any one time. So.
And were the flights secrets? I mean, it's ridiculous. Everyone talks about top secret, nothing's publicised, but there were correspondence. Were these extraordinary aerial aviation feats publicised at the time, or was that regarded as dangerous?
Only in the last year of the war. And obviously the tide had turned well and truly against the Japanese Empire.
Yeah.
And there was one story which I would have liked to have corroborated, and it was decades later by Rex Senior, who said, I remember listening to, what was her name, Tokyo Rose or something, talking about one of the flights. And I just thought, well, I'm not sure about that. I would have loved to have corroborated it, but these was certainly secret for the first 2 years of the war, or the first 18 months, if you like.
So the people of Perth who saw Catalinas take off didn't know where they were going.
And at the same time, there was a US Catalina squadron based there, and so the Qantas pilots, when they walked the streets, had to wear civilian clothing, and so much to their disdain, they were sort of frowned upon as being, white feather men and ledgers. And so, to all intents and purposes, they were mystery flights.
Can I just ask on that? Sorry, can I just ask on that? Why did they choose Catalinas and not the larger Empire flying boats and Sunderlands?
That's a really good question. I think because of the ferry flights, which Qantas had done prior for the Air Force, so they were familiar with the particular aircraft. These were ex-BOAC aircraft were in short supply, and they managed to get 5 of these from BOAC. And it's always daunting when a pilot puts his hand up, so I'll defer to David maybe.
Yeah, it's the endurance on the Catalina. So 2 engines versus 4 engines, you get a better trade-off between the amount of time that you can spend in the air. So the Catalina was made as a long-range patrol aircraft, which is why they went for the twin rather than the 4-engine. So you've got better fuel endurance. You've got more chance of being able to make the journey more safely.
So you had already a long-range endurance plane taken to Rose Bay with everything stripped out that could be stripped out and extra fuel tanks added on board.
Sorry, that's counterintuitive. I would have thought that if I was going to make a long journey and I had 4 engines, if one of them failed, I'd be okay. If I've only got 2 engines and one of them failed, I wouldn't be okay.
So the thing is, 4-engine aircraft wouldn't have the fuels to get there in the first place, because the most efficient aircraft is one with 1 engine for the amount of horsepower that you need. Right. But there's less reliability in that, obviously.
Yeah.
So the trade-off is between reliability and fuel efficiency. That's why we've got large twin-engine aircraft now that do all the long flights around the world, because that's much more fuel efficient, and engines are reliable enough that you can operate just with 2 engines.
Thank you. Right. I think last question from David. Bill. Sorry, David.
Thanks, Jack. Does anyone know when the Imperial Airways ceased operations and when Qantas took over? Because Imperial Airways, to my knowledge, made the first flight from Australia out of Camberwell or some long reach, I think maybe. Took about 2 weeks to get to London. I think in or about 1933. But then British Imperial Airways took the stage, maybe Imperial Airways by a different name, but what I'm trying to get at, were Imperial Airways still flying in World War II?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that David could help me, but I certainly know Hudson Fish saw an opportunity with the airlink to the UK being severed that I've got an airline that could provide the service. And of course, after the war, as I think I said, that became the kangaroo hop with Constellations, I think. So I'm not sure what happened to Imperial.
I think
Imperial,
tell us.
as far as I know, Imperial Airways that were government owned, British government owned it, early, either just before or early in the war, like 1939, 1940, it amalgamates with something, and becomes BOAC. And I think there's 2, if not 3 companies come together and becomes BOAC. And when they have their first Qantas flights with the flying boat, Qantas does the leg, I think it's to Singapore, and I think it's Imperial Airways do the rest of it, and eventually it gets extended to New Zealand, and there's a separate airline with 2 or 3 Empire boats, the Teal, which was a joint Australian-New Zealand thing that goes the leg from Rose Bay onto Auckland.
Fortunately, it's now afternoon tea, so you can Google it and argue to your heart's content. Thank you.